This is Ari Koretsky, and welcome to Jews You Should Know, introducing the broader community to interesting and inspiring Jewish men and women making a difference in our world. Some are already famous, some not yet so, but each is a Jew you should know. We are back with another fabulous episode of Jews You Should Know. This week, celebrity interviewer Heather Dean. Really cool story, fantastic background, where she, in her professional capacity, got to speak with luminaries like Robin Williams and Al Pacino and many others, and has her own Jewish journey. Today, does a lot of production work on behalf of the Jewish people while living in Israel, so a lot to learn from in her story. A reminder, as always, to subscribe wherever you are listening. Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, SoundCloud, Spotify. Of course, please share with your friends as well. Follow us on social media at Jews You Should Know, spelled out fully on Instagram and Facebook, or with just the letter U on Twitter. Comments, suggestions, love to hear from you. JewsYouShouldKnow@gmail.com. And please, I hope everyone is staying safe and healthy during this very difficult coronavirus COVID-19 period for those listening during our release window and anytime shortly thereafter here in May 2020 and beyond. And now to our conversation with celebrity interviewer Heather Dean. We are here with Heather Dean, longtime celebrity interviewer, now speaker and author, teacher. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you very much for inviting me to be on your program. It's a great podcast.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. You obviously have great taste in podcasts. And tell us a little bit about, Heather, where you are coming from now, and then more importantly, or where you originally came from to get there.
Right. Well, I am very fortunate to tell you that I'm coming from the Holy Land, where I reside with my family. I used to visit Israel a great deal as a youngster with my family, and then as an adult through Aisha Torah's New York community. So the family I grew up in was a family that wasn't so religious, but definitely pro-Israel, pro-Zionist, the kind of family that my parents would buy Israel bonds. Before I was born, actually, for a time, my father was a professor at Technion University, which is a top-tier engineering school in Haifa, in Israel. So definitely, parents that loved Israel sent my siblings and me to Hebrew school, which is an after-school program for public school students in our community in Ohio, in northeastern Ohio.
Where exactly did you live growing up?
So growing up, I lived in Shaker Heights, Ohio, which was a community. Yes, right. It's a suburb of Cleveland. I think it was back then 35,000 people. It had a sizable Jewish percentage, but it really wasn't one of those suburbs that was heavily Jewish by any means, but definitely, a respectable number of Jewish.
That would be more Beechwood, University Heights, Cleveland Heights.
Exactly, yes.
So you went to a Hebrew school growing up, a little bit, kind of that typical American Hebrew school education, it sounds like.
Right, exactly. So my folks were members of a conservative synagogue. So I was not sent to a day school. And the Hebrew Academy of Cleveland is a very well-known, well-respected day school. My parents opted actually to live in Shaker Heights because of the outstanding reputation the public school system was there. And it really was for a public school, it was great. And I knew it the whole time I was there. Great teachers, great programs, diverse students. And that's what they wanted. And so that meant the Jewish part, the Jewish education would just have to be after school in Hebrew school.
And did you have any early sense of what you wanted to do professionally?
Yes. I recall very clearly as a junior high school and high school student. In junior high, I wanted to be a journalist and a news anchor. But in high school, I was so fascinated, still am, by consumer behavior. I thought I would go into advertising. So I knew it would be some aspect of communications that I would go into. And so, yeah, when it came time to enroll in university, I went the whole route of business marketing, again, with the goal of being an advertising executive. But my grades as a business student were awful. I had no business being a business student. So I took
school, by the way.
I went to Case Western Reserve University. And I did end up graduating there. I took a break for a year and realized I really could graduate college if only I majored in something I like English, because I was good with the English language and still am, and grammar and reading, writing, that whole thing. So I switched majors and graduated with an English major, actually with grades finally that were so good. They were actually better than the grades I got in high school. So English was a very good choice for me to major in. And I gave up wanting to go into advertising and marketing because my school advisor, who was also the advisor to the College Film Society, that was my academic advisor. I also belonged to the Film Society. And this is where a love of cinema, a love of creative arts really, really blossomed for me. So I continued on with English, and being a volunteer at the school's film society, I was asked to be a director of the film society in my senior year. So heading up a campus film society is a great responsibility, but also very creative.
What does a film society do? Are you producing films or?
Right. The Film Society is the group that actually programs what films are shown at the campus theater. So that's a big responsibility when you decide this is the roster of films that are going to be shown at the campus movie theater. This was just before the dawn of when everyone owned a VCR. You remember those?
I do remember those quite well, sure.
So that kind of, definitely made an impact on the cinema industry. But anyway,
you had a lot of power in this era.
Right, back then. And also I hosted a weekly college radio show. So just really all the creative juices flowing. I knew that this was somehow I would be in some area of production. I wasn't sure if it would be film production one day, radio or television production. What really locked in that I would end up working in television was an internship I had at the CBS affiliate in San Francisco. My folks had moved to the Bay Area when I was in college. My dad accepted a chairmanship at the San Jose State University's business school.
I guess he was good at business.
He was great at business. He was the internationally renowned scholar of business and industrial engineering. So when I was visiting my folks that summer, I was accepted among many candidates to be an intern at the CBS affiliate. And I just had such a great summer working super hard as an intern there. What clinched it, though, was while I was deciding, do I end up going into film production as a career or television production, I saw at that CBS affiliate so many women who were in positions of power making important decisions of what was going to be programmed there on television. And at the time, still it happens to this day, there really aren't so many women who are in positions of power making critical decisions. So it was just, for me, as they say in Hebrew, a davar pashut. It was a simple decision that I would go into television production. And I was off and running thanks to that internship.
Going back to Case Western, yes. What were some of the movies that you brought to town over there for your,
right.
Any of them?
Right. Yes, I definitely do. So one of the things that was special about the Film Society is that during the week, there were films that students would pay for at a greatly discounted price, but Sundays was always a free series. So that was so much fun to program what was going to be the Sunday series for the semester. It was always a theme. So one semester I programmed a Sunday series with different sports films, and that series was called This Sporting Life, which is also the name of a film about athletes. So,
This was in the 80s? When was this?
It was in the late 80s. So
Late
I would.
80s. So was that Hoosiers era, or what were the big films out there?
So one week it was Raging Bull with Robert De Niro, that movie, and another week it would be Downhill Racer, which is a skiing film starring Robert Redford, as I recall. So different films that were about different kinds of sports. And then there's a different semester I programmed films that were all films that starred James Stewart. Do you remember Jimmy Stewart?
I do, sure.
So back then he was alive, and I thought, and I really tried that within this Sunday series, I tried through his people in Hollywood this is when he was alive, to have him come and be a guest for that weekend, and but they very politely declined. He's too advanced in age to make the trip to Cleveland and all that. So
It's a Wonderful Life. What were his movies?
Fantastic. It's a Wonderful Life. I've seen it so many times, and sometimes I'm just in tears from start to finish. It's such an inspiring film. Really, really something lovely. But so he starred in the Glenn Miller Story, and he co-starred in the Philadelphia Story. Many, many classic films. He starred in 2 Hitchcock movies. It was really a tremendous career, and he was definitely a beloved actor.
Well, to make it more Jewish, just to bring it around, according to IMDb, his last role was in American Tail Fievel Goes West, the 1991 classic, where he was the voice of Wiley. So there you have it. His last role was a Jewish sort of kind of role.
Excellent. Thank you.
There we go.
Telling me that. Lovely.
And while you were there as well, what was the Jewish life on campus like?
Right. So the Jewish life, I know there's a campus Hillel. At this point in my life, and for a very long time back then, Judaism and anything to do with religion was completely off the radar for me. And this is what a childhood of Hebrew school can do to a person. There's a famous joke that a synagogue is having a hard time getting rid of the rats that were infesting the classrooms and the whole synagogue. And so they came up with the solution is that they bar mitzvahed the rats, and the rats never showed up again.
There you go.
So, and this is what happened to so many people around me, myself included, is that unfortunately, other than the benefit of learning how to speak, read, and write Hebrew, which was part of the curriculum, and learning about the state of Israel, there was basically almost no education about what Judaism is. And I write about this in my book, that one day that solidified that for me was where they had a guest rabbi from a different congregation come for an Ask the Rabbi Day. And this took place in 1 hour of one of the classes. And he picked out of a hat a question. He was going to pick out of a had different questions that we were allowed to submit. He picked out one question, and it ended up being the entire question that took the whole hour. And that question was, who wrote the Bible? And if you can imagine someone hemming and hawing for an hour over who wrote the Bible and could not come up with a definitive answer, you and I both know that answer is in one word, who wrote the Bible, and that's the Almighty. But I just thought, wow, well, this is definitely not something that even this rabbi is connecting to. None of us students were connecting to Judaism. It was not relevant to our lives. It was definitely not exciting or interesting. It was the sort of thing we just had to go to because our parents said. And by the time people were bar mitzvahed, bat mitzvahed, really people had enough by then. And I don't know anybody from that. I know one person from the Hebrew school system from my hometown that is a religious Jew today, other than me. And she and I were friends in junior high, and friends to this day, and she lives in a different neighborhood. in Israel. So, but that's it. That's not
Right, but not much activity at Case Western in terms of your Jewish.
Oh no, for me, no. I had friends and roommates of all religions and all backgrounds, and no, in fact, one of the things I read about in my book is with a name like Heather Dean. So nobody really knew I was Jewish, and I was definitely of the school of don't ask, don't tell, because in my early freshman year, I would overhear people saying very terrible things about Israel or Jewish people, and I thought, wow, I'm just going to hide behind this name Heather Dean and really get an earful, if I must, of what people really think of Jewish people or of Israel. And so, because I was well liked in college, so I didn't want people to feel uncomfortable or for me to do any gotcha kind of moments. I was sort of like being the journalist, the undercover journalist.
Fly on the wall.
Fly on the wall, getting a feel of what they.
What was your radio show about there?
So my radio show, was that so fun? I have a smile on my face because that was such a pleasure. Many years of programming, college radio show. So I just did a music show, pure and simple music show, and classic college radio. College radio was really, really in its heyday, actually, when I was there. I'm part of the Gen X generation. And so Gen X music, I still think to this day is some of the best.
Like the 80s stuff where you play pop, Michael Jackson, where you playing?
So that's pop music. So
yeah.
Gen X music for college radio I was into REM before the rest of the world, before they got
before Out of Time.
Right. So by the time they released Out of Time, they were with Warner Brothers. Well, even with Document, I think they were already starting to be with Warner Brothers. But before then, they were with an independent label. And so a lot of groups that were with independent labels, Susie and the Banshees and the Cocteau Twins and all these other fantastic groups from Gen X. It was a terrific time.
Did you go by DJ Dean?
No, I was Heather. I was Heather Dean.
DJ Dean could have worked. I'm just saying.
That's so cute. That's really cute.
We're a little late for it now, but if you ever revisit that vocation, you can.
I don't know. Is there somebody named DJ Dean that I know?
It just has a good ring to it.
Ah, right. So my father, having been a college professor, people thought, oh, he should head the School of Management.
The dean.
Yeah.
Was Dean shortened from something, or what? Where was that origin?
So yes, it was shortened by some unpronounceable name from the shtetl, but it was a Kohanic name, actually.
Oh, interesting.
Father,
Diener, I know one named Diener who was a priest.
Right. So it's a shortened name from a Yiddish way of saying the servant of the friend of the servant, something like that. The servant of the friend. So whatever. Thankfully, one of my brothers is religious, and he is a full Kohen in good standing, and duchens, and does everything Kohanim can do in our day.
Duchening Dean. There we go.
Right. I should tell him that.
Not DJ Dean, but Duchening Dean. Yeah. Close second.
Right.
So you're out in San Francisco, and you're doing this whole TV kind of production gig.
Yes.
What did you really kind of fall in love with out there about that business?
Oh, love it. Okay, great question. So television production is so fantastic. One of the big thrills, which I write about in Searching for Heather Dean, is I explain in the memoir what it's like to work in a television production office. And that starts with actually getting in the door. So when you have your magnetic card, your security card, to get through the door, and it's like going into Oz. I really felt that way, and I still get chills. Like, wow, I really did that. I really had a career in television. That you go into a production room, and it's especially whether it was KPIX, CBS in San Francisco. When I was graduating college, I started my first, I got my foot in the door at MTV. So wherever it is in TV, it's once you get into that production room, there's a lot of activity. And because when I graduated college, and was working in New York City in television. So that is really where the ripple starts of the ripple effect of television news. And including MTV, that meant music news and popular culture news. So I was hearing things at the early morning staff meetings that the rest of the country and the rest of the world would yet to find out. So if there was a press conference coming up, or if so-and-so was releasing this or announcing that, I would hear about it early morning at the staff meeting, and then the producers were each assigned, go follow this story or set up that interview, or whatever it was. So, and then yes, it would be news put on television shortly thereafter, and very, very exciting. It really is exciting working in television. I'm very glad I don't work in television anymore, but when I was in it, and when that was the focus of my world, so yeah, it was a great deal of fun. And only now, looking back, do I realize that was part of a spiritual journey. I didn't realize it back then, and I was not on a spiritual quest back then when I started out in television. But looking back, I realized the kind of access that I was given to work on, whether it was the #1 live morning talk show in San Francisco, or later on to work in MTV, and later on after that to work at E! Entertainment Television. To get to the point where I'm interviewing A-list actors, actresses, every comedian you can imagine, models, Broadway stars, this incredible, incredible career, interviewing celebrities on a daily basis, and all of the perks and all of the gifts, as if you know what swag means, and all of the and celebrity friends, and the whole thing, I realize now, was part of a greater plan. But when I was in it, yes, it was a great deal of fun. And I just, I didn't realize then that having that kind of access in that world and being a key player in that world, it was for a better reason than just promoting Bruce Willis's movies and Robert De Niro's movies and Gwyneth Paltrow's movies. There's a greater purpose than that. But
what was your actual role at initially? Were you on the production side? And it sounds like eventually you migrated to the on-camera side, or the actual interviewing.
Yes, exactly right. Yes, you've read the book. So that's what happens. See, that's what happens when you are in any business long enough, is that if you're good at it, you will be considered the expert. So, for example, you are an executive director where you are, and I know that you didn't go to rabbi school, and first thing they said, let's make you executive director of this chapter of Memoir. It happens when you work hard and know a thing or two. So yes, I worked really super hard in television production, which meant I gained lots of experience of how to conduct television shoots on location or in a studio. And that's because I started low man on the totem pole. So I saw the experienced people, the actual producers, do this. And I saw actual producers conducting interviews with very big, important people. So eventually, you assist enough, then they give you your shot. And I got my shot over and over again. And I was the one now on behalf of MTV or E! in New York City anyway, attending press conferences, press junkets, one-on-one interviews, working hands-on with the camera crew to make sure they got this kind of a shot, that kind of a shot, working with editors to make sure that they dissolved from one frame to the next in a certain way. A lot of decisions that I saw the people ahead of me doing, so that when it was my turn, I knew what to do. Eventually, I would say over the course of several years, probably 5, 6, 7, 8 years in the business. So I was also producing interviews for the Associated Press. And Associated Press, AP, is the largest news service in the world. And the nice thing about a service like AP or Reuters or United Press International is that for little markets like Kansas City, Cleveland, Chicago, Detroit, big markets also, they can't possibly be everywhere, but the Associated Press can. And that's why a service like that is so big, because their reporters and editors in every town. They feed.
Yeah.
Right. So I was for Associated Press. I worked as a freelancer who was in New York City. My role was just be in New York City and interview every celebrity that comes through New York. And then that goes out over the AP radio feed. Once in a while, on behalf of AP in New York, I would go up to Toronto to cover the Toronto Film Festival, or go down to Atlanta to interview Val Kilmer and Kim Basinger for the movie they starred in. Whatever it was.
Is that a Batman movie?
No, so with Kim Basinger, that was for a movie she starred with Val Kilmer, which was, right, I see what you're saying. No, they were in a movie together, which was sort of like a family drama. It was, that was not for Batman. Although I interviewed Val Kilmer for a different thing. Do you remember, he did a Western, it was a really good Western about Wyatt Earp. So he played Doc Holliday. So I remember interviewing him for that, yeah. So anyway, so eventually, having been this interviewer of celebrities for several years, it got to a point I was already interviewing over 1,000, close to 2,000 plus people that were in the entertainment business. So it includes a lot of famous people, but also directors and producers and composers who did film scores. So many people. So by the time you get to that level, I was invited by this or that news network to come to the studio, and I would be the pundit, sort of like how, on political shows, Meet the Press. So you have pundits who weigh in on this because they become the experts. So I was sort of like occasionally filling that role of the expert celebrity entertainment reporter who was asked to, go down to the Fox News studio and give feedback on last night's Oscars, or to go to NBC News and be interviewed about this or that celebrity. This would happen with a good deal of frequency, but I still kept my day job and just did celebrity interviews constantly.
Who would arrange the interviews? Would somebody do that for you, or you had to hustle your own gigs?
So that's a really interesting question, because when it's at that level that I was producing interviews for such big networks like MTV or E! Or the Associated Press Radio Network, so the pitches would come to me. They would come to me directly because I was the producer. So I was on everyone's mailing list, and I would constantly get mail from all the different movie studios or television studios to let them know. So let's think of a big movie like Star Wars. Okay, so when Star Wars was coming up with one of their sequels, so Paramount Pictures would inform me and invite me, along with my colleagues, to screen the film, to come to at a certain date and location, to interview everybody in the cast and the director, George Lucas. And I remember one of my colleagues was very upset that it happened to have been on Mother's Day, that Paramount scheduled this for the Star Wars version that was with Natalie Portman, like the first time she was in.
Oh, nice. Nice Israeli girl.
Yeah, nice Israeli girl. Yeah. So that's how that would happen. I was just invited constantly to interview these people, go to press junkets, whatever it was. So I didn't have to hustle anything. There was once in a while I would hear this or that celebrity is coming to town, and I would just ask my editor, do you want me to go for this interview? And the answer would be either yes or no. It was usually yes. If I made the suggestion, I kind of knew what my editor was going for.
So when you were doing these kinds of interviews, what would be the relationship? Because it sounds like you would become social with them at some point and go to parties and different events. Did it become a friendship relationship, or more of a social relationship as well, or with some of these personalities?
Right. So, yes, I mean, I definitely got asked out a great deal, but I would just sort of like laugh it off usually. So you know what? I actually had my friends were from all different realms of New York City. New York City is such a diverse place. So I had friends from my neighborhood, but I also had friends from the comedy world, and these were struggling stand-up comedians who would just go to all the different comedy clubs and try to get time on stage. Nowadays, they're very super famous, but I remember when they were just starting out, we were just friends who would hang out, and I was never a comedian, and I was never a comedian's girlfriend, but these were all buddies of mine. That was my favorite group of friends.
Any of them household names now?
Oh, without a doubt, of course, yeah. So one of my great good friends was Daryl Hammond, who is the cast member of Saturday Night Live. He's no longer cast, he's like the announcer, but he was the longest running cast member of Saturday Night Live. And a dear, wonderful person. It was really surreal to also interview him for a few of his projects once he was famous, because we were like good buddies. But with Daryl, so I remember when he was very well respected, but just nobody in show business really knew him so well back then. And I remember when he was nervous and asking, do you know the comedian Jeff Ross? He's now the Roastmaster General, so to speak.
Heard the name, I don't know him. Yeah.
Okay, so Jeff Ross. I remember like at one night at the Comedy Cellar in the where the comedians hang out before they go on stage, and he was saying, "Oh, I'm so nervous." This is Daryl saying that I was invited to go on Letterman, and what am I going to do? And I have 6 minutes. And so Jeff Ross is like calming him down, like, dude, I've done it a couple of times. This is what you can expect. And I remember this very, very clearly, this conversation. And Daryl has not only gone on Letterman, but The Tonight Show and SNL, and the rest is history. So this is one example of many friends of mine who are household names. And if people want to know more about that, so that's also in my memoir. There's many stories of that.
Incredible. So who would you say, because you were interviewing some exceptionally talented people,
right,
whether they are paragons of virtue in their private lives or not, but certainly, people at the peak of their professional abilities, who would you say you really learned from, and what were some of the messages you gained from speaking with such high achieving people?
Oh my goodness. Well, there's a question I've not been asked. Who did I learn from? There's many people I learned, don't be like them. Who have I learned from? I would say that most of my life lessons really would come after that. And I'll tell you why. When it comes to lessons that have staying power and stay with me, these are lessons that would later come when I would take classes about authentic Judaism. There are many times that I'm really sorry to name drop here, but I interviewed Al Pacino several times. And I remember one time he had said some very interesting things about acting. And what I could tell you what Al Pacino had to say about acting, and Dustin Hoffman told me about acting, it would probably take about 5 minutes to tell you that. Now, if I contrast that with listening to a class by the great Rebbetzin Tzipora Heller, which I did earlier this evening for an hour, or listening to a class by Rabbi Kellerman, or Rabbi Dr. David Gottlieb, and on, Rabbi Akiva Tatz, all these superstars of the Jewish world. So these are lessons for life that are so fulfilling and so enriching that is what has staying power and applicable lessons that stay with me throughout the day in family life, marriage, friendships, just between me and the Creator, whatever it is. That's what has staying power. But yes, I could tell you 5 minutes worth of material about acting because of conversations I had with actors. And I could tell you a bit about directing from conversations I've had about, but what does that do for life? What does that really tell you that has staying power and something that's relevant to life?
I guess potentially the portable lessons would be, people who have had to sacrifice a great deal or had to hone their craft, in a very specific way in order to reach a certain level of excellence.
I hear that. So I'm thinking so one of the people that's considered the best actresses of her generation, Meryl Streep. So I interviewed her once, and she didn't talk so much about honing her craft, but she did refer to herself and her iconography, her star status as, quote, this thing that I've become. For example, I'd asked her, do you think you'd ever host Saturday Night Live as a guest host? And she just laughed it off. I mean, she answered no, that she wouldn't. And part of it was because of this thing that she had become. So, she didn't talk so much about honing their craft. When a celebrity does an interview with a journalist, they're paid by the studio to promote the movie. So what they don't really want to talk about their personal life so much. They don't want to talk about themselves and their struggles. They are there because they must talk about whatever the next project is, the movie or the record album, and they're not so interested in revealing their deep dark secrets. And I think also with honing their craft, it's a hard thing to explain. Now, in the case of Darrell Hammond, he does talk about, because he's such a top tier impressionist among other comedy talents. So he'll talk about like how he achieves his ability to do those impressions. And I've spoken with other actors and actresses who are impressionists. So some of the actors, they would talk about how their method to doing the impression. When I talked to Yardley Smith, who does the voice of Lisa Simpson, so she was not interested in talking about that. It was just for her, not because she's rude. She was actually very sweet, but she just didn't want to talk about the craft. Maybe it's because it's personal or because she doesn't find it interesting to talk about. But
when you were in these situations at that time, putting yourself back into that scenario,
yes,
did you feel starstruck? Were you enamored of these people? Were you unimpressed by these people? Was it just kind of a matter of fact, a job for you?
I like that question. So I had started from a really, really young age. So my first celebrity interview goes back to my local Cleveland days. I started doing celebrity interviews just on a lark as a junior high school student, reporting for the school paper. And I wasn't so interested in reporting on the sports teams of the junior high or the AV club or the chess club or the physics club, but I was interested in interviewing local Cleveland celebrities. So I would get on the phone and I would call whatever it is, the CBS affiliate, ABC affiliate, and get put right through to that newscaster and ask them point blank, may I interview you from my school newspaper? And they all agreed, like one by one.
I'm sure they did. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, isn't that funny? But one by one, I interviewed so many of the local Cleveland news people or show hosts, and not knowing at all that would one day be my career of interviewing celebrities. It was just this thing I wanted to do as this starstruck junior high school student. By the time I was at MTV, so I would say that my very first press junket, my very first celebrity interview for MTV was just me one-on-one interviewing Steve Martin. So that's where, as the interview had gotten underway, I had a surreal moment of holy moly. I was thinking something else. Holy cow.
That's what you were thinking, right?
Yeah, right. I was thinking, holy cow, this is Steve Martin. And, when I was I remember, do you remember Steve Martin, the wild and crazy guy back in the days of Saturday Night Live? Like
Absolutely.
Steve Martin from my childhood. I mean, I've since interviewed Steve Martin several times, but that first time, all right, for that moment, I had a surreal moment, and that was it. After that, I had interviewed just several celebrities for MTV, and once you get that under your belt, at least in my case, so no, I was never starstruck after that, never, not even with Al Pacino and Robin Williams, maybe with De Niro, because at the time he was my favorite actor. But no, and there were some really, really super big people. The one person I was a little bit afraid of at first was Mike Wallace, who was the great reporter for
60 years or something like that.
60 Minutes, yes.
60 Minutes, yeah.
60 Minutes. He was such an intrepid and feared reporter. He was one of those reporters that would catch crooked businessmen and crooked politicians, and everyone was afraid of him. And I was afraid of him too. I have no idea why, I had nothing to hide, but it was Mike Wallace after all. And within 10 seconds, he was such a pussycat. And I interviewed him in his home and later at his office at 60 Minutes. And he recorded an outgoing message for my answering machine. Do you remember those? So no, I really, really don't get starstruck.
Many of these personalities, of course, are Jewish.
Yes.
Did Judaism ever come up? Was it ever kind of a touch point between the two of you?
Yes. It came up, especially when I was becoming more religious, which I did not intend to happen when I was a celebrity reporter. But there you have it. I did become more interested in exploring my Jewish heritage. And
so take me through that a little bit. When did that start to happen? And were you kind of growing tired of the whole industry, or did you just kind of run into certain personalities that had an influence on you?
Right. That's a great question. So what had happened was I really wasn't a religious person when I went into show business as a reporter. And I wasn't interested in becoming religious, just none of it. Again, so turned off by the whole Hebrew school experience and didn't feel any spiritual connection to anything. It was around the time, though, when I was at MTV, again, Gen X and the New Age movement was really gaining a lot of traction, and a lot of it seemed to be very alluring. And I wasn't like a New Agey, flipped out kind of person. But by chance, I guess, I had heard some classes that a nice Jewish girl named Marianne Williamson would give on the local cable access channel in New York City. And so I would watch some of these lectures, and then when she would come to New York City from where she lived in Los Angeles, so sometimes I would see her in person at Town Hall. And so those she had a lot of interesting things to say, not Jewish, but interesting spiritual lessons about replacing feelings of fear with feelings of love, and a lot of New Agey kind of stuff from a book that she considered a holy book, which I read, and whatever. It wasn't a Jewish book. But that whole New Age movement, that at least it got a little bit of a spiritual interest that came to the fore. And when I realized that the spiritual philosophy that she was perpetuating was actually like this house of cards that was not based in any kind of truth and not based in any kind of profit, Prophet, maybe the other kind of prophet, but not a genuine prophet. So already I was a bit of a spiritual seeker, just a bit disappointed, quite disappointed that was not the true path to God. So I started to explore, like, what is the true spiritual path to God? And when I was at a certain crossroad in my life, I had this sudden onset of a fear of flying. So I asked my friend Rebecca, I want to get over this. And I had also a sudden onset of hypochondria. I detail this in my book. I thought, I really want to shake this, because it's no good having a fear of flying if you're a journalist that gets flown to this or that film festival. And the hypochondria was coinciding with my own mother of blessed memory, with the decline in her health. So I had remembered something that my mother had said when I was a kid about how rabbis counsel people. And I thought that was a bit of a joke, because I really thought rabbis, they just, give sermons at a pulpit or something. But here I was in New York City, sort of spiritual, not religious, and had no clue, like, where's there a rabbi around here, which is a joke, because it was New York City after all. So I asked my friend Rebecca.
Where isn't there a rabbi?
Right, exactly. But I had no clue. So I asked my friend Rebecca, who was sort of in touch with the Jewish community, could she recommend a rabbi that I could go speak to about this hypochondria and also fear of flying? And so she gave me a list of 4 rabbis and their phone numbers that she knew. I just randomly called the first rabbi on the list, scheduled a meeting, talked to this rabbi. He was very, very nice, and listened to all my problems about hypochondria and like everything else I was going through. And toward the end of this hour that he had given me of his time, I thought, wow, he's been so nice and heard me pour my heart out about these issues. I should probably ask him a Jewish question. So to humor him, I asked him, Rabbi, my parents are both Jewish, and one day maybe I'll have a family of my own. How do I impart my Jewish heritage to my kids? So he went into this thing about the mind-body-soul connection, and how bodies, we human beings are having a spiritual existence and spiritual, some sort of like very high-level Jewish philosophical answer that I wasn't quite ready for, but I knew that I had tapped into something deep and a deep question that I wasn't really prepared for the answer. So this, our meeting was finished. He walked me to the door and also said, if you are curious about Judaism, where we are, this is a center where people learn about their Jewish heritage. Like you, there are also Jewish people who maybe they didn't grow up with such a strong Jewish education, and they come here for classes, services, whatever it is. I'm certainly not going to nudge you, but you're welcome to come anytime. I think you'll find that the people here are very warm. And so with
where was that? Was that MJE or Aish?
It wasn't MJE, but I actually did return months later to this center. Again, I didn't know what the name was. I just knew it was on West 83rd Street. And so you know what I'm talking about. So it was on West 83rd Street, and I returned there because there were no celebrities to interview that day. And that day was Rosh Hashanah. And all of the publicists of these celebrities were in Temple. So I thought, all right, well, I'm just going to put on some nice clothes, go to this place on 83rd Street. And that's when I saw the sign outside said AISH. And I didn't even know how to pronounce it. I just wondered, well, what is Aish or Aish, whatever this word is. Yeah. So it's the great Aish Torah, of course. And slowly, I would go back to classes. I would bring a friend sometimes, one of my MTV friends I would bring to a class. And yeah, slowly, a Shabbat meal here, a class there. And then came the Steve Eisenberg Experience, his famous standing room only weekly Torah portion class.
Sure.
That was also that was a big hit. So
now in Miami.
Now he's in Miami.
Yeah.
Steve Eisenberg and I were under the chuppah. Let me tell you why.
I'm curious. Not together.
Right, we were together under the chuppah, but he was my witness at the wedding of myself and my husband.
Wow.
I thought, I've got to get Steve Eisenberg under the chuppah one way or another, and if he's going to be my witness, hopefully that'll send a message to heaven to send him a wife, something. But yeah, so the great Steve Eisenberg, I'm very, very grateful to him and all of the Aish Torah staff, the rabbis, the Rebbitzins, their families, and here I am 20 years later and hosting a podcast for Aish.com, the place that started it all, Aish Torah.
So eventually you obviously did matriculate out of the show business industry. What was that whole process, and how did you end up in Israel?
Right. Okay. So with Aisha Torah, Aish, New York, uh, when I started there in the late 1990s, really it was a center of Jewish learning. And that was pretty much it. Learning, classes, Shabbat, Chagim, everything you can imagine, community center being. And then came tremendous subsidies from people in the community who would subsidize Aish congregants' trips to Israel. So I was on the second Aisha Torah mission to Israel, which is, a tour, 10-day tour is very nice. And I hadn't been to Israel since I was 14 at that point.
Jerusalem Fellowships?
It was a regular Aish mission. This is before fellowships. So just an Aisha Torah, just mission, just a trip. And when I had started to already learn about from these classes they gave about this is what our father Abraham did, and Isaac and Jacob, and like all these different places in the Torah. And then when you're actually in Israel and you are seeing this, it's just, the connection that's made is incredible. And so this was back when you could actually go to Jericho. A Jewish person could go to Jericho. And so we were in Jericho, and we were along the, I guess it would be the road of Jordan, like the Jordanian highway in Israel. So just all these places that the Bible just really came to life. And not only that, then there was the day we went up to the Golan Heights, and I really flipped out at how gorgeous the Galilee, the Golan Heights, and a lot of the things I had learned and read in the prayer book actually bounced out for me once I was up in the Galilee and the Golan Heights, because of how lush the land of Israel is. Israel may be a small land size-wise geographically, but there are so many climates and types of land in Israel that if you're prepared for it, you can really just connect with all of it or a certain part of it. But when I was in the Golan, I realized this really is God's promise to the Jewish people of such bounty in the land and such beauty. So from then on, anytime I could come back to Israel, I did. So when Aisha Torah did its next mission, which was a learning mission, it wasn't so much touring at all, but it was being in classes all day, something I'd never experienced, and I loved it. I drank it up. It was the first time I'd learned Chumash with Rashi, and this was in Israel at Aisha Torah's Executive Learning Center in the Old City, and so it was fabulous. So trip after trip, I just it's not easy when you're a journalist with deadlines to get 10 days together at a time to go anywhere, but at least my editor was fine. Like, he kept my seat warm if I needed to take off for Israel for another 10 days. My assistant was very, very happy to substitute, fill in, and do those celebrity interviews for me. And I just loved being in Israel. I didn't like leaving in Israel, but I knew I had a fantastic job to go back to in New York City. I really, really enjoyed being a celebrity interviewer. It was a great job, and I wasn't ready to give that up at all. So it was, it's the hardest thing when you have a foot in both worlds, right? The hardest thing when you really want to be in one place and yet you're drawn to another. So I was very fortunate when the opportunity came up to learn for a few months actually in Israel. When that came up, and again, I thank my editor in the States for at least not saying, well, just, why don't you just for firing me. He did not fire me. He just said, okay, we'll keep your seat warm. When you get back, you'll you're back in the saddle, you get back to work. So the thing is that when the opportunity came up to really learn in Israel for a couple months, that was at Neve Yerushalayim, which is an English language college for women, all about Jewish studies. And I was really where I wanted to be, in a class learning about Judaism, with great scholarly teachers. And I extended my leave of absence another month, and then another couple of months, and on, until 1 year later, I'm still in Neve Yerushalayim, still on the payroll at the network, but obviously I'm letting my assistant get paid in my place. So 1 year later, after being in Neve Yerushalayim, I was in Jerusalem, introduced to my future husband.
What was his background? What was he doing in Israel?
Yeah, so actually it's funny because he had been in yeshiva as a teenager. So it's sort of like I've been playing catch up to him all along. But he runs his own business and still learns every day. But I'll tell you, that year where I was in Israel learning about my Jewish heritage, learning about the role of a Jewish woman, learning so much about the Torah portion and different Sfarim, different holy Jewish books. It really was a serious crossroad for me, where I would meet with this mentor or that, just a couple of mentors, especially Rebbetzin Tzipora Heller, who is my Rebbetzin to this day, thank God. And just like basically cry with them over how much I wanted to stay in Israel, and yet I have the most fantastic job. For anyone who's a fan of show business, popular culture, I really had the most fantastic job. So it was really hard. It was a really, really hard thing. But I'm having this conversation with you in Israel, where my husband and I we've been married over 18 years, and where our children were all born, and here we are. So the decision.
What made you finally kind of take that leap?
It really was just trusting in God, knowing that this is really where I felt at home. And what was easy for me to take that leap was probably because I had already interviewed Robin Williams 5 times. I had already interviewed like so many celebrities multiple times, so it wasn't new anymore. In fact, do you remember the movie Dave with Kevin Kline and Sigourney Weaver? Okay, yeah. It was a great comedy, really, really one of the best comedies, directed by, I think, Frank Oz. No, sorry, who was the one that did The Big Chill? Lawrence Kasdan, I think that's who did it, right? So I had an opportunity to interview Kevin Kline, who is one of my favorite actors, and Sigourney Weaver. And you know what I did? Like the day of the interview, I was living in New York City, and I just actually had someone else fill in for me, because at that point I was already kind of like done. I ended up probably, my favorite sport is race walking. I probably just ended up race walking in Central Park that day. So I was done. It lost its luster after just so many times interviewing so many of the famous great celebrities. And the other thing I'll tell you, this is a dirty little secret about Hollywood movies, is that for the most part, there are so few gems, maybe just a handful of gems. There's definitely a lot of duds of movies that are being made, but the vast majority are just so mediocre. And as somebody who covered films, I could see, okay, that's why this was green lighted, meaning that's why this script was probably approved and they got this star in that role and that star in another role. I could tell this is why this movie was made, but it's so mediocre. And when you spend so many hours in a screening room watching mediocre movie after mediocre movie, and then to do interviews with these great big stars to talk about some mediocre movie, there's just so very few gems, and it got to be drudgery. What can I say? It was just drudgery, and so much of television to me is mediocre. And to compare that with learning about authentic Judaism, which that just became and is still just so much more exciting, because that's like, as we say, Lamaisa, these are life lessons applicable to real life. And why do I need to watch pretend movies that aren't very good anyway, and interview celebrities who really aren't so interesting and so smart, and when there's something so much better out there? And that's Judaism. It's so much better.
You mentioned that at some point, as you were becoming more active in Judaism, you would interface with some of these Jewish celebrities.
Yes.
Judaism would be kind of part of the currency of that conversation. Can you talk a little bit about that?
So there was one time that I interviewed, it was the second time I interviewed Woody Allen. And there was a film that he directed with Sean Penn called Sweet in Love. And one of the very first jokes in the movie was, it was a very not nice joke told by not nice characters, and it was disparaging of Jews, of a Jewish stereotype. And so I called him on it, and I asked Woody Allen why that was included in the movie, and he's just sort of laughed it off, like, "Oh, that's just it's such an old joke. It's such an old stereotype. I felt that it could be laughed at." So whatever. He's obviously very publicly disconnected with his Judaism. That a lot of his jokes are reductions upon reductions of Jewish tropes, anti-Semitic tropes. So, that was a bit disappointing. There were other Jewish people, though, that they interviewed. She may not be so well known at all to the audience, but she was a celebrity photographer, Lynn Goldsmith, and she still is. So she had interesting things to say about this or that interest of her own Jewish heritage, but also she has photographed so many Jewish celebrities, and so she and I would talk about which of her Jewish clients showed an interest in Judaism. For example, Max Weinberg, who is the famous drummer and band leader for Conan O'Brien's show. He's no longer. He left for greener pastures. But so I've interviewed him several times, and so he has a bit of an interest.
So Heather, in closing, what are you doing today? You've written a book, and tell us what that's called, and what else do you do? Tell us about the podcast and so forth.
Great. Okay. So the book that I wrote is a memoir called Searching for Heather Dean. And Searching for Heather Dean is actually the title of a song. And so an editor who was working with me on the book said, that should be the title of your book.
There you go.
I had a different idea.
I thought if we'd find you, we'd find Bobby Fischer at the same time, maybe.
Right, exactly. Searching for Bobby Fischer. Yeah. That was so. I covered that movie actually.
Did
so
you?
I got to interview the little kid that played the one that was the chess champion, and Joe Mantegna, and everybody from that film and Steve Zalian before he became the top screenwriter in Hollywood. So anyway, whatever. Searching for Heather Dean is a memoir that answers the question, why on earth somebody who was an interviewer of A-list celebrities, why on earth would she walk away from that business? So it details that. The feedback that I've gotten on my book, it has been very tremendous. Anything from people saying it's very inspiring. Most everyone tells me it's such a page turner. I lost so much sleep reading this book because I just couldn't put it down. So these are very, very nice comments. But I feel like it's an interesting enough story that I put it in book form, because really what individual has had that kind of access to that many celebrities and at that level only to walk away. Like, really, why on earth would someone walk away from that? So that's the memoir. It's available on Amazon, and it may be picked up by a movie agent who might make it into a vehicle for one of their actresses. So stay tuned for that.
Then you can interview yourself.
Oh, that's so cute. Oh my gosh, that's really funny. I like that. So that's what I do. And then also, yes, I produce for Aish.com their weekly podcast. At the moment, Aish.com's content, just as we speak right now, is really, really devoted to this terrible pandemic and upheaval that the world is going through. So we don't have a coronavirus podcast.
I had to know what's going on right now. I didn't hear anything about it.
Yeah, exactly. I know it's when you come up,
missed that story on the evening news. Yeah.
Right, exactly. What the podcast does, though, the whole mission of the podcast is to focus on the Jewish home, and it is called At Home in Jerusalem, the podcast on Aish.com. So every week, it's a different, well-known Jewish Torah scholar or author or speaker who has something very specific to say that enhances Jewish home life, lessons from the Torah. So that's been a nice bridge to having interviewed celebrities from the Hollywood world to now get to interview stars of the Jewish world, Jewish stars. So that's the Aish podcast. We are well into our third year now of the podcast on Aish.com. So now at this point, I get a lot of questions and invitations to consult other people on producing podcasts. Many people have questions of, they want to start their own podcast, so they consult with me how to do that. And I also run workshops on how business people can increase their business to grow their business through media interviews. So all of these decades have been part of the media establishment. I know a thing or two or 500 on how to effectively pitch somebody who is a producer or editor for the chance at being interviewed or profiled on their television show, radio show, podcast, whatever it is. So things that have to do with media podcasting, it's all under the umbrella of my company called Heather Dean Productions. So for people that are interested in following me there, so you can subscribe and get updates on all of my projects on Heather Dean Productions.
Awesome. Well, Searching for Heather Dean is the name of the book. And I think those who have gotten to listen to this hour with us together have gotten to discover just a little bit about who you are. And by reading the book, they'll get quite a bit more. Heather Dean of Heather Dean Productions, longtime celebrity interviewer. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. And I want to thank you for all the great work that you do. Memoir is a fantastic, fantastic organization that I encourage a lot of people to explore. And if you already think you know about Memoir, you should also encourage your Jewish friends to investigate their local chapter of Memoir, because the work that Memoir does, I know people that are affiliated with it now, people that are students who have grown so much Jewishly. I bless you to continue doing your great work.
Okay, well, what a plug. Did not expect that, but I've got to extract that and use that in my own PR moving forward. Thank you so much, Heather.
Thanks again.
This has been Ari Koretsky on Jews You Should Know. Please visit us at JewsYouShouldKnow.com and subscribe at iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you consume podcasts. Find us on social media at Jews You Should Know. If you'd like to become a supporter of this podcast, we would greatly appreciate that, and you can do so by visiting patreon.com. That's patreon.com/Jews You Should Know. Finally, if you have enjoyed this podcast, please leave us a review so that we can continue to grow and introduce many more people to Jews You Should Know.